another episode of the Aligned Life, the Goddess Life, where we dive into living life fully aligned, mind, body, and spirit, at peace and unbothered. Today, I have Adam Darkley of Devil's Conjure at my table, and we are going to dive into this wonderfully magical path that he has built for himself. Adam has always had a trickstery side, much like a sacred clown, and has spent the last 10 years knee deep in root work and ceremonial magic, conjuring the dead and commanding goetic powers. He offers magical materia dedicated to the powers of heaven and hell, to the starry and planetary spirits, angels and gods, elemental beings, to the hags, fae, devils, dead, spirits of the land and underworld and beyond. Through Devil's Conjure, the spirit pulses within each ritual anointing oil like a heartbeat in each amulet or charm, a living vessel and home for these kindred spirits and ancient allies. Thank you for joining me at my table today. I can't wait to hear more about how you dove into such a deep, connected, and commanding path.
Yeah. Thank you again. Yeah, it's a pleasure.
So tell me how you got into this. Where did this start for you, and
Mhm.
how did you become the devil himself?
Hmm. So it all began when I was a kid. I had some very harrowing experiences. I had, near-death experiences when I was 3. I basically drowned and came back to life. I've had car wrecks where I was dead on the scene. All these death experiences coupled with experiencing miracles when I was a kid without having any context to what that was. Until later on, where I was able to kind of make more sense of it. But yeah, I grew up in Tennessee. I grew up Southern Baptist, on at least on one side of the family, but knee deep in and superstition, and of the South. I grew up in Tennessee, outside of it was in McNairy County, but we lived outside of town in the boonies, and so I was just surrounded by all of that, by the folklore of like the mountains where we lived, and or the foothills of the Appalachians, and yeah, it was one experience that led to another. But ultimately, when I was around about 8 or 9, I knew that Christianity wasn't for me. I never felt like I belonged. And so I started quite young, kind of searching for resources and more understanding of myself and the world and my place in it and things like that. And so it just kind of went on from there. I started studying Buddhism and Wicca, or not really studying, but more so learning about it, because those some of the only access that I even had to spirituality as a kid. And so it just one thing led to another, and when I was about 17 or 18, I started working with shamanic healing, energy medicine, herbalism, alchemy, and then stepped into conjure, and then into ceremonial magic, and here we are today. So it's been a wild ride.
It sounds like it. You've been through a lot. I really like though how connected you have remained in your practice to that idea of root work, which we find a lot of in those foothills and in the Appalachian region. Um, what are some of the difficulties that you've had to overcome in continuing that work, either be it in a cultural perspective or a personal perspective? What are some things that have stood in your way?
Sure. Probably more than anything, myself. And just honestly, it's taken me years to learn how to, in more ways than one, get out of my own way. And that included the narratives that I grew up with, from my family, that were honestly just untrue. And so much of my kind of lack of experience, as far as religion or spirituality. And then there were certainly other barriers, of course, along the way. But I would honestly say it was me more than anything. And so, having learned to kind of step out of the way and let the magic happen, I find has been one of the most liberating things in my own work.
Oh, I love that. Do you find that coming from a place in a mountainous region has helped the way that you worked with conjure and root magic?
Mhm. I would say so. As a kid, we lived far out, and we had family that were nearby, but there weren't really a ton of other kids. Where even though I had friends and played with other kids as a child, but I spent a lot of time alone in the woods. Wading through creeks, swimming with moccasins, and just walking barefoot on gravel roads, and I felt I kind of had a really scary upbringing as a child, and so the woods were always like a sanctuary for me where I could go. And even as a kid, I may have not realized some of the dangers, but it always felt far more safe to me than home did. And so I feel like I was really blessed, and I feel very grateful to have cultivated that kind of connection with the spirits of the land and of plants, even when I wasn't even fully sure, who or what I was dealing with. I felt like earlier on I kind of established that, and that has probably strengthened or reinforced the work that I do nowadays.
I love that. I love that you were able to find security and safety through that natural connection. I
Mhm.
feel like that is something that a lot of us like. I'm actually from Kentucky. I'm currently in Tennessee now. But being also from an area adjacent, there
Mhm.
is so much that we find in the hills and in the woods and in the earth of these places that
Mhm.
we just feel called to. Like it's like we have always been part of these roots.
Mhm.
Um and so that's beautiful that you were able to find a place of safety when home didn't feel safe.
Yeah.
So that leads me to my next question of why leaning into the devil? Where did you find this connection with such a powerful spirit?
Sure. And so growing up as a Southern Baptist, on one side we were Southern Baptist. On my dad's side, they were Catholic and Methodist. And so obviously the devil was the cause of everything that was wrong, of every trouble. Anytime somebody didn't know what had happened or this or that, or they wanted to kind of manipulate the way people perceive things, they always, push the devil on people. And I've realized over time that Christians worship the devil far more than their own God. And so I felt like, in some ways, in my own work, that the devil wasn't the bad guy, and that's honestly how I have come to perceive things over time. But that honestly, he's gotten like a bad rap. And so my work in shamanic work and healing, and then in conjure, and then in some of the other work that I've done over time, and even working directly with certain spirits or powers who are devilish or trickstery in nature. I find that through that I've kind of been able to redeem that, and through that same work, and on in the same kind of path. um I don't know, it just feels natural. As a child, I was always in trouble even when I wasn't. And so I think there's some shame, some guilt, all these other things. The devil was the one ally that I went to who didn't judge me, who you know didn't bullshit me, and has probably helped liberate me in more ways than any religion ever did.
I love that. And coming from also a Catholic family, it's really interesting because when you do look at the ideas of Christianity, it is so they put so much power and meaning behind this entity, this spirit, this deity that
Mhm.
they're trying to move people away from. And I have always also found that to be very at base funny because
Mhm.
you're trying to move people away, but then we go to that Catholic idea, and that Catholic idea is something where yes, you're trying to still move people away, but there's so much power, there's so much
Mhm.
commanding force, and there's so much authenticity in what they
Mhm.
put in that idea that
Yeah.
it makes sense that a lot of people would be drawn to this idea.
Mhm.
um in my working and my understanding, he's always been very misunderstood, very similar to yours in that idea. And I really love being able to bring that energy into certain instances. And that
Mhm.
also goes back to older pagan ideas, horned gods and things like that, of
Yeah.
being free and understood.
Mhm. Yeah, there's so many pagan gods and old beings who just like the goetic spirits. Many of them aren't they're not just demons. They're old pagan gods that were morphed and villainized and kind of forced into servitude and things like that. And so, and beings like Hermes, he's certainly trickstery. Beings like Odin, and so they exist. The devil is probably like one of the oldest figures or forms that exists. And so, yeah, I mean I don't know. I just feel like I feel a lot more at home with a devil than I do any angel or God in a lot of ways. So I find like there's certainly trickstery in nature, and but often they're helping to initiate the witch. They're helping to reveal things as they truly are, and helping kind of whether it's clarifying our vision or aiding us in our work or whatever. The devil's always there when nobody else is.
Oh, I like that. I like the way you said that. That is a really good way to look at him. I have not thought of that before.
Mhm.
So going into kind of branching out into those other ideas, how did you come to connect with the goetic spirits? And did you have formal training in that? Was that something you did on your own? And how did you connect with them?
Sure. So my husband, Darian Darkley, he's probably my biggest mentor. Probably around 2011, 2012. He and kind of on from then, and certainly, we teach and share ideas as well. But he has a ton of experience in ceremonial magic, and so those were one of the class of spirits that he shared. Uh, you know, Kind of more context and information around, and I just felt naturally drawn to them. It's like, how could you not be? These terrible great powers. And so, he shared resources, shared things from his own experience, and I just kind of ran with it from there. And I've read through like the Lesser and Greater Keys, the Goetia, the Lemegeton, and all these different books, and I just find that they're one of the easiest powers to come to, and they're able to bring about things very quick. And So yeah, I don't know, it feels natural. And so once he taught me, once I came to certain resources, and then just started to kind of put things into work. They revealed so much in the way, and not only how to work with them, but even around like magic and things like that. So they're definitely great mentors, and they have far more to share if people can kind of get beyond their own fear and apprehension.
Oh, absolutely. I find myself often talking about one of my co-hosts for the other weekly slots that we do. She's actually a Kabbalic practitioner and diving into and Jewish Kabbalah to specify
Mm,
because there's a few different pieces,
mm,
but a lot of the Goetic ideas and is a continuation of the idea of the Jewish Kabbalah. And it is so interesting to understand the history and
mm,
the power and how ancient these
mm,
energies are. We often talk as spiritualists and as witches or pagan practitioners about our connection to the earth and our connection to the universe of the old ways. And
mm,
in talking about those, I feel like sometimes those are hidden,
mm,
partially because of what has all happened through the culmination of like the Golden Dawn and
mm,
OTO. A lot of it was very, very secretive, very hidden away for a very long time. And I feel like it created this chasm between a lot of practitioners and that magic. And we're
mm,
slowly coming to this awakening as it builds through it. Um, and that leads me into ask, how do you put all of this power, all of this connection, all of this wonderful practice into your business at Devil's Conjure?
hmm So I like to call it what I refer to as magical maintenance. Typically, I like to focus magic from various traditions and working with various classes of spirits to maintain things where they are and certainly grow and exalt things like with business, profits, clients, and certainly getting our name out there and ensuring people speak our names on high and things like that. So yeah, I've established a certain practice, a certain rapport with a number of spirits, gods, angels, devils, and they certainly help me, kind of lift the pillars of our kingdom, and keep things running smoothly. So.
Oh, that's wonderful. I like that idea of magical maintenance.
Mhm.
I feel like as we progress, we have come to a place where spirituality is understood and it's expanding, but there's
Mhm.
so much of this and I'm going to use big air quotes here. There's so much of this baseline idea that keeps getting regurgitated,
Mhm.
and we keep stifling a lot of our community because we're like, and this also goes into the ideas of like shadow work. We're constantly like journal and meditation,
Mhm.
and we keep recycling this. But there's so much more to it, especially in ceremonial magic.
Mhm.
Um, what would you recommend to someone if they were looking to get into more ceremonial magic?
Sure. I would definitely recommend, if possible, acquiring some of the basic text, like the Lesser and Greater Key, the Picatrix, the PGM, like the Magical Greco Papyri, and just kind of diving in and reading all that you can, and then finding like a potentially like a legit mentor, a teacher, somebody who's been doing it, and consider taking, I see all the time some really great people doing classes on, goetic magic, ceremonial magic, astrological magic. So yeah, kind of just jumping in, establishing and getting a hold of whatever resources or text or whatever you can, and honestly figuring out what the hell you want to do with it, because that's one of my biggest things is like often clients, like with my retainer clients, a lot of people, they don't want to be a sorcerer. They want to learn how to how to accomplish that one thing, and then that's it. And so a lot of people, they may not go on to be sorcerers, and work for other people. And so, I find that kind of narrowing down what their goals are, like with ceremonial magic, or with all of it, like sorcery in general, and then, I'm kind of able to point people in a better direction. So yeah, there's a lot to it, and so, knowing what your goals, what your intent behind it, because you can end up dropping like a lot of money into into magic, and then realizing like, hey, I just really wanted like a better job or whatever. So.
Oh yes, yes, that is something that we also see in this spiritual boom right now. Is there's lots of high dollar tickets for
Mm.
things that people have been told that they need. They don't really know if that's what they need. And I've
Mhm.
noticed in looking at and going through your Sorcerer for Hire retainer service that you provide the whole spectrum, the whole idea, instead of just allowing them to kind of foolishly follow what they've been told by someone else.
Mhm. Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I'm all about, my way. I don't believe my way is like the right and one only way, but I'm all about steering people in the right direction. And because I too spent years digging deep, I've read so many books, and I've taken courses and this and that honestly I didn't gain anything from. And a lot of it has been rewiring the way I perceive, the way I think, the way I approach it, and kind of clearing away what doesn't serve me, so that I can be working, kind of in a right relationship with what will. So.
Oh, I like that a lot. I do also want to ask because I know that you read cards, and
Mhm.
I want to touch on that a little bit because you read cards, not
Mhm.
tarot cards, but cards. How did you fall into that practice and adapt it into such a powerful form of divination? I know that
Mhm.
it's very old, but
Mhm.
it's also one that people aren't really attaching to these days.
Mhm. Yeah. So, the first divination or form of divination, the first method, first technique that I learned was shamanic journeying. I went from that to runes, and then my husband Darian, at one point, like around 2012, I was learning, how to read tarot, the Rider Waite, things like that. And then as I stepped more into conjure, working in root work, and some of my mentors, I feel like I kind of got steered in the right direction. One of the people that I consider one of my biggest mentors is Professor Charles Porterfield, and he has a book that's called Hoodoo Bible Magic, and the Art of Playing Card Magic. And so I think the Art of Playing Card Magic is the one that essentially like inspired me, because I never knew at that time that you could work magic with like tarot cards, playing cards, things like that, much less that you could read with playing cards. But upon picking up his book, and being inspired from him over time, but basically just putting it into work, I utilized his book, and then the rest of it is essentially purely intuition. But I have through his book, The Art of Playing Card Magic, and through some of the spirits that I work with, basically cultivated a practice around reading playing cards. And so obviously it's a bit of it's a bit of correspondence, but most of it is purely intuition. So
How did you build your intuition to be that strong? Or if you
Mhm.
had one large piece of advice as far as building intuition for our listeners, I've
Mhm.
noticed that it's really difficult for some people to tap into that higher plane as we move forward in this big spiritual boom.
Sure.
I feel like part of that's a social thing, but
Mhm.
part of it also is because there's so many techniques. What would you guide a person to do?
Yeah. So I believe that discernment is entirely necessary. It's a pivotal aspect of working magic, of calling up spirits, things like that. And so one of the biggest things that I recommend is kind of getting out of your own head. We're all, if you're approaching like you're going to try to sit down and do a reading or do a ritual or this or that, I find that many of us are overstimulated. Like we're all in our heads. We've got all this going on, stressors and all that stuff. And so being able to kind of get out of your head and in your body, is really helpful. And so one of the ways that I do that is by entering a very light trance. And so one of the techniques that once again Darian taught me years ago, and it's one thing that I teach my retainer clients. What you do is you essentially close your eyes and you roll your eyes up with your eyes closed, as if you're looking like facing your forehead, almost like as if it forms like a triangle. And so many people know about the pineal gland, things like that. With this technique, I'm not even really talking about that, but essentially what you do is you sit, you close your eyes, you look upward with your eyes closed with your eyes. If you hold that, you will feel tension. If you hold it longer, and you're very very calm breathing, you will find that that loosens up. Like you can almost feel like a wince, but then that like it loosens. And so when you open your eyes, you will realize that you are in a very light trance. And I find that often, like I mentioned before, we're stressed, we've got all this stuff going on, and then we're trying to enter this really zen zone when we've been dealing with all this stuff. And so being able to get out of your head and in your body, some people dance, some people chant, or whatever. But being able to make that slight shift, of an altered state into just a very light trance, it will allow what I call like the river. Basically, it will allow that to flow, and then you will notice that you're not imprinting or forcing the information. It's just coming to you. And so it can be kind of like a tap of water or whatever, where it'll flow and then it may slow, but that's okay. And so just kind of allowing yourself to be a part of the process and not trying to force it, I find is also something that's really important, because uh, people who are starting out, who are learning, they can feel like already that, is this even real? Am I even gifted, quote unquote, or whatever? And so if you can kind of push all that stuff aside and just kind of jump in, that's the best way that I usually recommend, and how I typically teach people. So.
I like that. I like how you said for people to understand that they are part of a process and they're not controlling the process.
Mhm.
I feel like in this very charged social atmosphere that a lot of people do feel like they need to be in control.
Mhm.
I feel like that's a big part of what we're experiencing is there's this runaway train effect that's happening with
Mhm.
people, and they're trying to grasp for that break everywhere that they possibly can. And really, it's about the journey that you're on and doing with it what it gives you. So
Mhm.
I like that idea of being part of the process and not forcing the process.
True.
Um, do you feel like what you had to face and overcome in yourself through just going to use the word shadow work here, although that is what I consider to be a more new aged idea. Do you feel like going through that made it easier for you to utilize that trance?
Probably, yeah. And probably some of the other things that happened to me where I basically died and came back and you know, that kind of connection between the worlds and with spirit probably you know, kind of I don't want to say like boosted it or you know, kind of open things in that way, but it probably allows kind of helps me having more of a proclivity to working like in a trance state or with other worlds or something to that degree. I've obviously experimented with entheogens and other techniques like breath work and things like that too. But yeah, I would probably say so.
It's so interesting because you say that you don't want to say that having that experience enhanced it. I would, and just to take that liberty here, I would totally say that that enhanced it,
Mm-hmm.
because you were in that liminal plane.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you said that you were a child. Do you recall, if you feel comfortable talking about this? If you don't, that's also fine. Do you recall what it was like to be in that liminal space, or do you have any of that still left in what you put into your practice today?
Sure. So the first two times that I had a death experience were both when I was 3 years old. They were in two different bodies of water. One was in a pool and one was at a lake. It's called Pickwick Lake in Tennessee. And I basically drowned both times. Once my grandma found me, and once my mom found me. And both times I was like upside down, like and white as a sheet. And my grandma had to like perform CPR, and my mom, you know, she just tried to like, you know, get the water out of my lungs and stuff. But yeah, I had that happen when I was around like 26, 25, 26. I had a car wreck where I was dead on the scene for like 10 minutes. And so I've had a couple of experiences like that that I definitely remember, and they're they used to be a lot more terrifying, and now I look back at those as kind of like trials. Like it's like this had to happen for whatever reason to get me where I am today. And I would definitely say that that's given me a stronger connection with the spirit of death and beings like Santisima Muerte.
Have you worked a lot with that deity?
With Santisima Muerte, or just death in
Yes.
general. I would say so. Yeah, I've in some of my work, either for clients or for myself, I find that it's necessary as a worker, honestly, to cultivate a connection with, you know, because we're all about connecting with life and what's alive and what we can see and what we think is real. And it's like, well, we're all going to die one day. And so I think that as someone who's a worker between the worlds, as a witch, it's really important to kind of befriend death, and so that you aren't just like living and racked with fear, and so that when your time comes, you can kind of embrace that and kind of give yourself to it instead of trying to fight it. And I feel like in and of that in some ways gives me almost like an extra layer of protection, because I've kind of beat death like multiple times. So I know that, however, that may sound like it comes with a bit of hubris, but I feel like more so that's kind of me and Santisma Muertes. That's kind of like our comedy, I guess, between it. That's something that she would certainly laugh at. So.
Oh, I agree fully. And you definitely, maybe not cheat, but you definitely have been closer than most have several times.
Mhm.
And I like that you put this importance in it, and because there's such a need for us to connect in that duality. I'm
Mhm.
drawn to that idea of, we are living solely to die.
Mhm.
That is our ultimate purpose in what we do, and I'm going to use big air quotes over purpose because there's so many
Mhm.
different ideas and definitions, but
Yeah.
we're taking each breath getting closer to death all of the
Mhm.
time.
Yeah.
And so I also feel like harboring that connection is a large part of spiritual practice. I
Mhm.
also feel like it's super important for those who work with other deities like Hecate or the Morrigan, who
Mhm.
are liminal beings, to understand what that in between feels like. So thank you for sharing that experience with us. And I'm glad that you're here. That's fantastic.
Me too.
um so, if there was an overarching advice or one thing that you would suggest for people to focus on or learn, what would that
Mhm.
be?
We touched on one of them. So discernment, I feel like, is key. Like whether you're reading for yourself, performing magic, if you're calling up spirits, you want to know that who you just called up is that spirit, because there's spirits that will take the form of another, that will try to be an imposter, that will try to manipulate, influence, amongst other things. But I would say ultimately, if you're approaching like magic, sorcery, the occult, and you're seeking to step into it, it kind of harkens back to what I said earlier. Understanding whether you are just interested in the occult, whether you actually feel called or drawn to being a witch, or if you just want to raise it worth. Because I've come across people who spent years and years and years, and they come to realize that ultimately that's not what they wanted. They felt like that they had to seek out witchcraft and spend their whole lives and become initiated and all that, and then ultimately, what they wanted was just one simple thing, but they felt like to get there they had to go through all this. So it's like, I think when you're approaching magic, divination, any of this, understanding why you're even coming to the spirits, or to magic at all, I think is key, because people can get lost in it, people can lose themselves, people can spend a lot of money, and just to come to the realization that they wanted to get laid or whatever. And so, knowing, having an understanding, for why you're wanting to work with the dead, and work with angels and all that stuff, because like I said, you can spend a lot of time and get nowhere. So.
Oh yes, yes, you can. And I also like how you said you can get lost in it, because you can,
Mhm.
there's a book that I have been reading, and it's called Meeting the Shadow on the Spiritual Path, and it walks through the different avenues and ideas of this human longing that we have for these spiritual connections.
Mhm.
And it's so interesting as I watch people come into this spiritual space, and so many of them are like, no, I have this spiritual connection over here. And yes, I just need magic so that, like you said, to get laid or to get rich or have success.
Mhm.
It's like this little sprinkle on top of what they're actually doing for their spiritual work.
Mhm.
And it sets apart, there's a large difference between those people, and
Mhm.
big air quotes there, not to sound like that I'm demeaning or anything, because I'm not, I'm just separating, and people like, and I'll lump us together, like you and I, who are called to be those that are lost in that liminal space.
Mhm. Yeah.
I feel like there's a big difference there.
Yeah, and I feel like we're all kind of gifted to do magic, but some people have, like,
Yes.
for whatever reason, cosmically, astrologically, and ancestrally, like maybe it has something to do with their lineage or family line. There are people that legitimately have like a gift, or that's their role that they're intended to play, even if they don't want to, you know. And then there are people that, once more, they could honestly just go to a witch or somebody that's already, like me, that's already, doing the work, that's already offering the services, and pay a bit of money, and get what they want, and they can go on happily with their life. So many people,
Yes.
I find, you mentioned awakening and all that. I see so many people that they're just trying to leave Christianity, or they're just trying to make sense of it all. And it's like, it's kind of like pagans. You can be a pagan without being a witch, because they're not the same thing. It's like there are pagan witches, and there are witches, and then there are pagans. But I think, casting light on that is so important, because there's so many people that think that if you're practicing anything other than Christianity, that you must be a witch, or something else. And it's like, no, that you can have a certain practice or belief, or be a part of religion or spirituality, without being like a straight up sorcerer or something like that. Obviously people can can kind of fall into both groups or whatever. But
Oh, definitely, definitely. There was actually a long time before I came to my understanding and acceptance of the larger picture,
mm,
where I was very, very angry when people would call me a witch, because
mm,
I was a practicing pagan. Although I did lots of ceremonial work and things like that, that is also a pagan thing.
mm,
Um, but people would address me as such, and I was like, no, 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 there's a big difference.
mm,
um
yeah.
and it wouldn't be until like years later that I would understand how much the idea of roles plays, like you said, some of us are born to work this particular side of things, and then there's a whole other idea of us. And
Mm,
I'm actually drawn to a part of the Bible, that I won't directly quote, but they explains how everything works together. We all need to have these individual ideas and identities in order for us to create this whole spiritual picture.
mm,
And I see people leaving Christianity in droves, like they are fleeing,
mm,
not because of the idea of Christianity, but because of what it has allowed at this point. Um, and
mm.
people are very lost. And so I like that you have this idea. Do you use this idea also when you utilize that sorcerer for hire retainer service and you work with your clients and try to help them see where they should be?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, because a lot of those people feel like, oh, well, if I'm gonna work in magic at all, I might as well be working for people or this or that. And it's like, well, that's a whole nother thing. It's like often, you probably need to just focus on yourself, get your ducks in a row, and then kind of go from there. But yeah, there are a lot, I catch myself saying that a lot in recent conversations that a lot of people are just lost and directionless, and so that's the same reason why you see pagans and witches and people going back to Christianity or Catholicism, because they felt like they didn't find all they needed, or they didn't get the one true answer, or they didn't do that one ritual that made them like float into the sky or whatever, and it's like, well, uh, there's just a lot more to it. And so that's why I always recommend people, who think they want to be a witch or think they want to do this. It's like, go find people who are doing that, read their story, see what they're doing, and then kind of decide. Because, you know, it's a lot different being like a sorcerer for hire and then somebody who's just is doing magic for themselves. They have their own work, they're focused on themselves. When you start working for people, you have a responsibility to those people. They're making themselves vulnerable to you. They're sharing their deepest secrets, and you kind of have their life in your hands. So it
Yes.
things take on a whole nother level.
Yes, absolutely. So if someone wanted to get in touch with you for your sorcerer for hire or for any of the other wonderful things that you offer, I actually still have a bottle of your red devil's oil that I use. And I have been eyeing a few other things. How would one get in touch with you?
Sure. So you can always find us at devilsconjure.com. Our link tree is linktree/Darkly's Inc., which is DarklysInc. You can find us on Instagram. You can find us on Facebook. So yeah, and you can always send me an email at devilsconjure@yahoo.com with any questions about our services, products, all that fun stuff.
Well, thank you, and for
Mhm.
sharing that with us and for sharing your story with us. Is there anything else that you want to say to our audience today before we wrap things up?
Sure. So I'm always booking for my Source Fry retainer. I'm currently offering a few limited spaces for my card reading services, which you can find on Linktree. We have some new products that we've just recently released, including our Soul and Leo talismans, our beloved dead oil, which is for working with your ancestors and the dead, our black pullet charms. We're also working on a new series of classes, which I'm working on launching and putting out information for it. But one of our next upcoming, I'm going to be doing like quarterly classes and possibly even more But the next class that will be on, I believe, September 1st. It's called Standing in Your Authority and Speaking with Power. And it's basically going to be a class, and I believe Darian is going to be teaching alongside me with that, but we'll be teaching those who attend, basically how to, stand in your authority, speak with power, what that means, context around that, and basically, how to apply that to your own practice and your own work. And we also, you can find it on our link tree as well, but we also have a show called, it's called Dark Press Presents Speak of the Devil. We're about to start our new season. So people can go and find, you can find our last season and a slew of our videos that we've already done on YouTube under Speak of the Devil. And beyond that, yeah, just, stay true to yourself and always seek out truth in all you do.
Oh, thank you for sharing this space with me, for sitting at this table with me. And everyone, go check out Adam's services. They are phenomenal. All you have to do is look at the reviews, and the work speaks for itself. But yes, again, thank you for sitting at my table and having this conversation with me. And I hope that we get to sit down and talk again soon.
Let's do it. Yeah, it was an honor. Thank you.
Thank you.